Welcome to the Thriving Misfits, the podcast where we celebrate resilience, embrace diversity, and challenge norms. I'm your host, Fyiona Yong, and on this episode of the Thriving Misfits, I'm joined by Gruen, co-managing director at NovAzure. Chris' journey is one of transformation, innovation, and a deep commitment to sustainability. Starting his career at Shell, he led multi-million-dollar transformation programs across B2B and B2C markets, shaping the energy transition through projects like EV chargers and future fuels. But his entrepreneurial spirit and passion for purpose-driven work led him to co-found NovAzure, a company dedicated to accelerating the transition to net zero by bridging the gap between startups, corporates, and investors. Chris's story is also one of identity and adaptation. He is born in Hamburg to a German father and a Chinese-Brazilian mother. He grew up navigating different cultures, languages, and expectations. From early encounters with not quite fitting in to embracing his international background as a strength, Chris has built a career and a life that thrives on breaking boundaries. So today, he helps businesses embrace sustainable innovation, guiding startups to scale, corporates to evolve, and investors to make impactful choices. In this conversation, we will explore his personal and also professional journey, his experiences as a misfit, like what's on his t-shirt, in different environments, and how embracing that identity, that misfit identity, has been key to his success. So welcome, Chris.
Thank you very much, Fyiona. What an entrance. What an entrance. And yes, I bought this t-shirt just for you here.
Fantastic. I love it. I need to have one of those as well. So Chris and I, you and I always joke. We're basically the same people, but we have never really met each other for the longest. So Chris and I, we grew up in Hamburg. We went to the same high school. We went to the same university, joined the same company. And then how long did it take us to meet up? At least, well, half of our lives, right? How old was I? 20, almost 30 years old. And we met in the Philippines, in Manila.
Yeah, out of all the places, exactly. So I remember that very vividly. You just came across me and you just looked at my name tag and you went like, "Is this Christopher Gruen?" And I went like, okay, didn't expect that. But yeah, this is where it was all revealed. You were just about like 2 years behind me or something.
Yeah. Yeah, but for some reason, we've never really met each other consciously, at least. But I don't know whether I've ever mentioned to you that story, but you were based in Madrid before, right? For Shell Aviation. And I remember at that time, I was supposed to have like these 3 months of exchange to go somewhere abroad with Shell. And I chose Madrid with Shell Aviation. But then, and they agreed. But then at the end, they said, no, we can't make it anyhow, because there's this new colleague joining us and he has taken over your desk. That was you.
Was it me?
Yes.
I know that story. Jesus. All right. Okay. Well, there you go.
I mean, I ended up in Marine and Shell Marine in London, which wasn't that bad, but it was so funny.
Wow. All right. Okay. We're Marine, so that was it as well. It was one of the international businesses. I think it befits our backgrounds one way or the other.
Absolutely. All right. So let's get started and get to know you a little bit better, Chris. So, you have navigated different cultures. You've lived almost everywhere in this world. So have you ever had a moment where you unintentionally offended someone from another culture?
Yeah, I mean, you know me. I mean, unintentionally and intentionally, potentially as well. So, but from an unintentional point of view, I remember I was probably not bemusing some Japanese folks by asking for a receipt. So, meaning I was coming to Japan for the first time. I read like, okay, they're actually dealing a lot with cash, so I had prepared myself, a lot of cash with me. I went upstairs to the room, etc., and then I realized there's no safe. So I thought like, okay, yes, fine. I hear about security in Japan being, great, but you don't have to worry about anything. But I was not feeling comfortable walking around with a lot of cash or basically just leaving it in the room. So I went downstairs to the reception, said like, here's, I would like to prepay you. And they said like, yeah, sure, fine, no problem. And then I said like, okay, so I've given you the cash. So could I actually have a receipt for it?
Mm.
Like, no, you've paid us. You don't, we don't handle out receipts in a way. And I said like, yeah, but I paid a lot of cash. So it would be great just to have a receipt. And that was so offending to them in terms of like, you're basically suggesting we would mishandle your cash somewhere or something, right?
Yeah.
So, and I could see it in their faces, and I went like, right, okay, maybe not the best idea. The receipt that I eventually got is the most impressive receipt ever. So it's actually
Okay.
hanging at my wall there somewhere in London.
All right, that's a fun story. So you and I, we both grew up in Germany and in Hamburg, in fact. So you grew up in Hamburg with German, Chinese, and Brazilian roots. How did that shape your sense of identity?
It was a mix and match already straight from the beginning. So my dad, being German, he was giving quite a German education. Whereas my mom was a bit of a tiger mom potentially, so like very strong education in terms of no, you have to do your homework and then you have to do some pre-work in terms of just being prepared for that, I don't know, session next week or something, and that was quite strong. Um, but having my family from my mother's side basically living in Brazil, that meant that we were visiting Brazil probably every year. Um, which forced as well, like speaking two different languages very early in my life in terms of English and Portuguese as well. And so I was straight from the start, since I was 4 years old, actually exposed to about, yeah, well, mainly three cultures. And that defined actually quite a lot in terms of mixing things up.
Right. Can be quite confusing as well. I mean, I grew up, and as you know, you're married to a Malaysian. They mix a lot of languages just in one sentence, right? So that's absolutely confusing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And sometimes, I mean, it may even happen in this podcast. Also, you think of you think of a particular word or so, and then you pick up maybe that word in one of the 4 or 5 languages that you speak or so.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, there are certain words that you just cannot translate, right? It just fits right there and you just got to use it. Now, I mean, you've grown up in such a multicultural world. Was there ever a moment in your childhood that stood out when you first felt like a misfit?
I think you broke off there for a minute, but yeah, I heard you still. So probably it was in 5th grade. So after you go through ground school, you know, for 4 years, etc. I mean, you grow up basically as a small kid, and you're not necessarily exposed in those first 4 years by, you know, people pointing out, let's say, differences. But I think in 5th grade, that was the first time or so when I was playing along, and one of the pauses basically um, between hours or so, where one of them pointed out like, so where are you really from? Oh, no, sorry, the first question was like, Chris, where are you from? And I said like, from Hamburg, from Germany. And they went like, yeah, but where are you really from? And I didn't get that question at all, until it basically dawned on me, probably about after the 5th time or so, just him basically asking like, you don't look German, so where are you from? And I
Yeah.
went, all right, okay, yeah, well, I'm kind of a mixed background, etc. So that was probably ever the first time or so where I realized like, okay, I'm different somewhat to others. I don't feel different, but I seem to be having a different impact basically on other people. So when it comes down to the misfitting piece or so, that probably might have been the first time in 5th grade.
Wow. I mean, you and I, we've spoken about it a couple of times before. My experience growing up in Germany was actually quite different from yours. I think the first time when I ever felt like a misfit was actually consciously. I think I was 6 years old. So in primary school, first grade maybe. And they were already starting to bully me because of the way I look. I had really long black hair course, the kids were starting to pull my hair. And similar to you, I think I wouldn't say that my parents are typically like tiger parents, but they did focus a lot on academics. And, they do want me and my brother to come home with good grades. And so that kind of also reflected on how I show up at school. And obviously, my classmates also recognized that after school, I wouldn't go play with them like at the playground. I had to go straight home, right?
Same thing. Yeah.
So and that's the reason why they kind of like I really stood out like a sore thumb, and bullying was a regular thing. I was there were milk cartons thrown at me. I had a boy punch me in my stomach.
Oh, gee.
So yeah, or maybe it's just the school that I went to.
Well, we went to the same school as well. So, right. I mean, oh, wow, that's weird. I think maybe the difference, and we talked a bit about this as well. So I'm probably the same height and more or less I'm having the same voice, etc. Since I'm about 14 years old or something.
Yeah.
I was probably about one head taller than everyone else. So, and then potentially being male, etc. I mean, if somebody would have thrown a milk carton probably at me or so, then my reaction would have been quite strong or so. So I think probably people didn't dare. So if I would have seen somebody throwing something at you, I would have intervened. That's for sure.
Oh, that's sweet. I mean, my brother had a very different experience as well. His experience very similar to yours. I'm not sure whether that has something to do also being male. So for him, he was instantly connected with his classmates because they would play football with each other, right? So I think sports connects as well. And I think it's also about the intersectionality. So, being Asian, being female, all of that creates a compounding effect when it comes to discrimination, but also privilege, right?
Yeah, I think you're right there. I mean, eventually, it's a number of different variables coming towards it, and it's how you're perceiving things as well. Also, I mean, regardless of gender or whatever, I guess there's also the point in terms of how you personally basically just engage with people around you, and I mean, you can't really choose obviously with whom you're going to be sitting in class as well, right? So, a couple of things basically playing into it.
Now, how did your parents' different cultural backgrounds actually influence your upbringing?
I think like what you said just now, there was exactly that point about I have to come to home to school immediately, and before you basically do anything, or so you have to work off your homework and really be drilled on stuff, etc. So the education was very controlled, let's say from a Chinese point of view, and I had an immediate benchmark because obviously my dad didn't actually play it that way at all. But he wasn't necessarily there all the time because he was actually working in Brazil still as well, half a year. So basically, like that meant for a tough time, basically for my mom in terms of having to watch two kids, my sister and me, for half a year, basically without him until I was probably about 14 or so. Which meant like, okay, the mom was basically number one in terms of actually saying what is acceptable to the kids and what not, right? So the education element was very strong from her, and my dad was always kind of very German in his approach, also tried to understand stuff. He was also more the emotional guy in comparison potentially to my mom. So there was quite a difference really between the two. So yeah, that influenced me quite a lot.
Now, you grew up speaking multiple languages, and typically I would get the question, what kind of language do what when you dream, what kind of language would that be? What is it for you?
That's really interesting. I have that question sometimes asked actually, or I sometimes ask that question towards others as well. I think it's a mix, and it depends really on where I am. So, but in most of the cases, I can't actually even remember anymore in what language I'm dreaming anymore. It's just like I understand the person, I say something, I can't even remember what languages it is. But I think if I remember correctly, like heading to Spain or so, and then being exposed to a lot of fast-speaking Spanish people around me for the first 3 months completely was overwhelming. And then I started at some point, like very consciously, actually dreaming in a particular language in Spanish. But I think nowadays it's actually really quite balanced.
Mm. And when you think, do you think in a particular language, or it also depends on the context, on your environment?
I think it depends on the context. When I count, I would still probably count in German as well,
Mm.
to a certain degree. But then, actually, when I talk about certain numbers actually to others in German, I have to rethink again in terms of 45 instead of 54 or something, because I just
Yes.
always twist the last numbers around. Um, then it's primarily actually defined with the people that I'm talking to. I think you're an exception because we can speak in German and we can speak in English actually to each other.
Yeah.
But otherwise, it's like, okay, I know this guy speaks Spanish, and then I'm basically just switching over to my Spanish Chris.
Mm.
Always a bit of a point of where I am. I'm trying to almost automatically kind of absorb, let's say, a certain type of identity as well.
Yeah, that adapting yourself to that environment. And I mean, you mentioned Spanish, Chris. So for me, when I switch languages, when I switch from German to English, or sometimes I would have to speak Cantonese, I'm actually a very different person. I
Yeah,
mean, not significantly different, but definitely Cantonese, because Cantonese, I think that would be a third grade level, not third grade, 3-year-old level. I would be very different, perceived very differently as well, similar to English and German, because I think most of my life, my adult life, especially in the business world, I'm speaking more English rather than German, right? These days, I've started actually coaching, doing executive coaching in German, which was initially quite daunting when I thought about that, but now it's fine. But yeah, you mentioned Spanish, Chris. Like, do you feel that your identity will slightly change depending on what language you're speaking?
yeah, absolutely. And I may never notice it really, and it's just like obviously how others perceive you, and then when other people tell you, then you start actually understanding like, okay, there's something different. Like what I was saying about the guy in fifth grade, pointing out
Mm.
where you're from. There's other people basically pointing out, let's say, items that you know you don't really realize that you have them. So I remember like one guy, a good friend of ours, um, who also works in Shell or worked in Shell. He is Malaysian as well, of Indian background, and he's a very funny guy. And he pointed out when he heard me speaking Spanish at some point, he went like, "You're a completely different guy. You're like very Spanish, very emotional, or so. Actually, you sound way cooler. I like the Spanish Chris much more than the German Chris. Could you be less German or so?" And I think when it comes down to my German side, it's probably about the typical thing that a lot of people may have in their brain in terms of like very structured, very organized, um, thinking through very logically, etc., like highly reliable, blah blah. So which I have. It's a trait basically of mine as well. Um, but it actually probably presents itself more when I'm actually either having the German identity on or so. But you also spot there's a German accent actually in my English as well. And probably at some point it just slipped in there deliberately. I could imagine. So there you go.
All right. Now, you and I, we both started off our careers in Shell. I think that was also like your only employer, right?
It was until I basically created my own company. I mean,
Yeah.
the first entity on where I entered my traineeship was actually a German national oil company, which was DEA, which was very, very national. It just basically had operations in Germany, and you know, I wasn't really able to use anything of my international background as such. But then Shell basically bought DEA, or became a majority shareholder basically of the operation of the entity, and that's basically how I started slipping into Shell. So not necessarily by choice, but I fully embraced it.
Mm.
Thankfully, I'm heading into a multinational or into a truly global company at that point.
Yeah. Was there ever a moment in corporate life where you realized you didn't quite fit in here? Because I mean, the question I ask is because when I first started in Shell, and Shell is a great company, very inclusive and everything. But then again, there are, of course, certain colleagues who are less inclusive. So when I first started in Shell, I was also a management trainee, and I was being labeled, and I think I mentioned it to you, I was being labeled as the diversity token. If I would use the German word, they actually call me the diversity Anhängsel. It's like the attachment, the diversity attachment of the company. So again, because I'm Asian, because I'm female, because I was young at that time, definitely felt label, definitely felt, I didn't fit in. Did you have any particular moments in your corporate life where you realized you're a misfit?
Yeah, I think there's a negative and there's a positive sense. I think the negative one is probably when I started off in the German national oil company because it was like very, very German. And I just felt like, okay, I'm actually quite international and I'm missing even, I wasn't talking English at all. So all of everything was just purely in German, purely local. And I thought like, well, although I'm a German or so, I'm not fitting in here. And then when the Shell piece basically came over, I immediately went into aviation, and I felt so at home because it was like truly international. Like during the day, you were speaking to people in multiple languages, etc. So I really enjoyed that. But I remember a small little story when I was working in Spain, in Madrid, for aviation, but I was actually working for the Irish market. So, typical international construct that you would get out of Shell. And I remember like a Irish customer calling me up, or no, me rather calling him up. And he looked at the number in his display and he went like, that's not an Irish number. And I said like, no, that's actually a Spanish number. And he said, so you're Spanish? I said, no, I'm German. He said, I got completely confused. And I met that customer probably about half a year later or so, face to face. And he just looked at me and he went like, I didn't expect that to be you because you don't look German either. You said you're German. You don't look like a German, right? I mean, there was no offense in it, but it's just like
No?
you're always being reminded in terms of like, okay,
Mhm.
you keep surprising people.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, even when we go on holidays, like me and my husband, Chor is background is from Hong Kong, but he was born like you. He was born in Germany, so when he speaks German, English, there's definitely a strong German accent. So when we would both communicate with one another, definitely it's going to be in German. We're on holidays. All these German people are like, oh my God, why do you guys speak German? So then we would respond, well, that's, German, that's what we speak, where we come from. And then they would be asking, where do you come from? And we're like, yeah, from Hamburg. So there you go. But yeah, I think it's also a nice icebreaker, right? Like, I think changing your mindset, I think we talked about it a lot as well. So you can feel as a misfit from a negative standpoint, but it's, I think, also something that you can leverage on. I think it's a great icebreaker. And this brings me to the next question where, was there ever a point where being a misfit became an advantage in your career?
Yeah, I think many a times or so. And I mean, it's about you understanding what you have, obviously. What are your unique selling points in a way, and that you obviously drive these advantages in there. But again, it was like somebody else who pointed something out to me at that time or so. Again, working in Madrid, and it was like a very international office. So we had multiple. We probably had about 5 different nationalities, somewhat presented there, and I had an Italian sitting next to me, Enzo. And Enzo pointed out like at 7:30 p.m. we were still like doing overtime on stuff, etc. And he was like, you're quite lethal, aren't you? And I said, like, what do you mean? Like, you're as efficient as a German, you're as hardworking as a Chinese, and you're creative as a Brazilian.
Oh,
So, which made me laugh, which made me really laugh also. Um, so the fact that he basically said it meant that I was actually playing towards these different attributes basically at some point, and he started realizing it. So obviously, I mean, he sat next to me, so he was listening into every single conversation I basically had because it was an open office. So he had quite a different perspective of all the different attributes I was actually playing along unconsciously. So that was
Yeah.
fun.
I mean, absolutely leveraging on your strengths, right? Like your misfitness, which I love. And I think for me, in my corporate career, definitely also being an advocate. I mean, starting when I was still in the refinery, and as you know, not a lot of young people working in a refinery. And then I joined the graduates network in Shell, and not only joining, but actually became one of the committee members and really advocating for the next generation in Shell. And then from there, also getting trained up as a cultural awareness facilitator within Shell. And then later on in Hong Kong, founded the Women's Network in Shell Hong Kong. So really leveraging on that, right? Being a misfit is not necessarily something that's negative, but I think it's also like when you grow up, when you're a teenager, you're already in that identity crisis. You don't really know who you are. You don't really know how to fit in. And I think that amplifies it even more when you're a teenager. But I think I definitely cherish, all these different aspects, the uniqueness that I have. And I think it's really about not necessarily waiting for others to create an inclusive environment or workplace, but it's something to recognize what is it that you can do yourself to embrace your own misfitness.
Yeah, and I think there's always, while you were talking, there was always that word home or belonging kind of flashing actually in. And maybe what has changed or so is that you were forcing a certain belonging, maybe, I mean, at least for me in my path, basically to a certain location. But then eventually, especially when you start traveling around or so,
Yep.
that sort of homecoming is actually not tied to a location anymore. So that has changed, I think, over the years, actually on my side as well. Um, in terms of actually focusing more on the people and the circles that you basically interact with or so. And you have the choice now, right? Now more than
Yep.
ever. I mean, if it's virtually or traveling around and living in different places, I mean, look at you, where you have basically all been or so. So if you have the option to adapt basically to something or so, then it's actually easy to jump, let's say, from one circle to another or so. And that basically plays towards your misfitness in a way, right? If you would
Yeah.
just purely local and bound to one situation or one circle or so, then you might actually just as you evolve, not be able to really accommodate, let's say, that journey.
Yeah. And I mean, I like what you mentioned about home, because I think this is also a question that you probably get to hear a lot. I always get questioned, oh, when are you going back home? And I wonder, like, where is home? And, for me, because my parents already relocated back to Malaysia, my brother is in Taiwan. And yeah, like you said, home is, and it sounds cheesy, but for me, home is where my heart is. And right now it's where my husband is, my baby, and my parents, right? That's home for me.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, in my case, it's probably actually moving around, let's say, different locations. I think primarily in a way is obviously, I mean, I've bought a home along with my wife in London, or near London rather. And so that's, let's say, home number one. But for example, my wife being Malaysian, she actually doesn't necessarily like England and the UK that much. She's always like more comfortable, sitting in Malaysia and walking around in flip flops at 30 something degrees, um, and being surrounded by great food, etc. So that's more home for her actually, rather than, for example, the UK.
Yeah. Now, you and I, we both took the leap into entrepreneurship. Again, like I said, we're almost like the same person, just you are male and I'm female. So we both took the leap. So leaving the corporate world to start NovAzure, such a huge leap. So what made you take that risk?
I think all above everything, it was an emotional trigger in a way. I mean, I wanted to stay in the UK because that's where eventually my wife, coming from Malaysia, etc., we needed to find, let's say, one common ground or one location, obviously, to stay in. And still working in Shell at that time, I was still looking for a position actually within the UK. But you remember how rigid and unflexible these policies were from an HR perspective in the company at that stage. So I was looking there for jobs within the UK, and I couldn't find one that interested me at all. And I went further into looking for jobs, and I started to stress myself out tremendously, basically, on it. And I just didn't want to do, I don't know, an IT job or so that I could have done, basically, in my sleep. Um, and then I basically, my body reacted to the stress actually quite a lot, and I got shingles out of it. And it was actually quite wild because I had shingles straight in my face. I mean, usually you get it maybe, somewhere where you don't really see it, but it was smack on in my face. It was really hurting. And I was basically sitting like Quasimodo on the sofa for about 3 weeks. And I thought, like, why am I stressing myself out that much? And I didn't feel in control anymore. And it basically mixed in with a combination in terms of like, what's actually my purpose in life? Maybe so it was kind of an early midlife crisis. So probably all of these items then basically pushed me to do what I made my plan B, my plan A. It was always thinking about like, oh, wouldn't it be great if you would set up something that you own, that you do yourself? And but it's quite a considerate leap, right? So, and if you're within the cocoon and the safety of a big global international company that you actually feel quite happy with or so, then you're not necessarily doing that leap. But now I basically thought like, okay, I'm not finding anything. I will do it. I will do the leap, and I will get back in control over, let's say, the decision I want to make for my life. And I want to do something that basically drives purpose into it. And that's basically where the company came up, and where there was a co-director who pretty much felt in a very, very similar way, Jean-Jacques. So he's French, speaking about continuing being completely international. And what I commented basically with him, was the purpose that we're regaining, actually backed by doing something obviously that we love. It wasn't always easy, and especially the setup of a completely new brand wasn't easy at all. But we always woke up with feeling quite energetic, and the point about what gets you out of bed, right? So the purpose-driven element that came back very quickly, leaving the corporate life.
I mean, I also always say that it's the corporate comfort zone that you're in, and you have this brand that backs you up. And I always remember the initial couple of networking events that I've attended with my own business card. And it's like, do people actually want to talk to me because they don't see that Shell logo on my business card anymore?
Exactly. I had the same thing. I mean, like whoever actually walked around, and I mean, during times when where we were still working in Shell, and you show your business cards, and everyone sees the pact, and they go like immediately, like, "Oh, all right, I have to talk to this guy," blah blah. But then, yeah, exactly. When you started off, and when you started off with a company that at that point no one ever knew, it was like, okay, who are you? And suddenly you were like landing at the end of a queue somewhere or so. And that was, that was probably a new experience right from the start that I feel actually a lot of people have leaving Shell as well, and that I might actually still be in contact with, or people connect me with or so, or from a Shell alumni group or something. Yeah, similar
Yeah,
experience.
definitely. Yeah, I mean, you definitely need to have those supporters, right? I always call them my advocates, especially in the first, I would say, 1.5 years. That was really tough to establish the brand and establish your voice in the market, letting people know what makes you stand out for the best reasons. But you also mentioned just now a very powerful word, purpose, right? And purpose is I would say, such a big thing to figure out. And many people, they do struggle finding work that really truly gives them purpose. What kind of advice would you give them?
I read it in a book at some point, I think, and that book was actually called Working Identity. Look it up if you're actually leaving, or you consider leaving the corporate life as well, or so. And it's about basically working and trying to understand, or almost like trying out different identities and see what sticks. And the purpose is the common denominator, basically, obviously through that search. And but uh, what became quite interesting, and what I would like to actually leave with people who are sitting in that situation is, there's a Japanese term that is called, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, ikigai.
Yes.
And it's basically like, imagine 4 circles, and the intersection is basically what you're looking at. And in each circle, you have a representation of what is basically well, how you interact with the world and where the purpose basically comes in. So what is it that you want to do that you love? So the pure purpose driven element. But then there's also the point about, what are you good at? Because what you love, you may actually be just right at the start of it or so, right? Then it's what the world needs. So is there a market basically for it? And what is it that you can do to get paid for it? And if these 4 items basically all intertwine, then you kind of hit the sweet spot, the ikigai, if you so will. And trying to find this out is a constant thing. I mean, it's obviously like, because the market changes, what the world needs changes, right? So we talked about decarbonization and climate change, combating climate change actually a lot. And this is where all of the investment had gone up to the point when Putin actually started to invade the Ukraine. And then basically the world, unfortunately, leads, a few different things now. And so it's in constant motion. But positioning it first and foremost from the point on what you want to do, what you love doing, which is also not apparent all the time or so, which may change as well, is basically something still that should be a driving force in it. But just be realistic in terms of, all the other parts of the circle, where you're good at, what the world needs, and what you can get paid for as well.
I love Ikigai. I love that concept. I actually read the book myself about the time when I was at the crossroads of figuring out, am I going to stay in corporate? Am I joining another company? Or should I just go all out and establish my own one? Right. And that's scary because, like, for me, I didn't have a co-founder. I actually wanted to do it by myself first, try to figure things out. Because sometimes when you have a co-founder, you kind of have to influence and convince each other. I just didn't want that in the initial phase. So Ikigai was definitely also something that I resonate with a lot, and something that really inspired me though, emotionally as well, was Steve Jobs. I think he gave a speech, graduation speech for the Stanford University. I watched that, I think, every single day for at least 2 months, and almost brainwashed me to try to figure out, what's your purpose? Like, why do you wake up every single morning? And it's not about just settling for something, right? So that speech really definitely changed me as well. So, I mean,
Maybe just as a small comment on that before we move on. I think obviously it sounds so almost romantic in terms of actually going down that path, but it's really not that easy. And plus, obviously, if you have a lot of bills to pay, and if you have children or whatever, etc., and a high mortgage you need to pay or so, then you may not necessarily have that luxury or so. I think I was lucky in that particular point of actually not doing such a big step in terms of, I got still a good redundancy package out of Shell, and that gave me a runway. I had the mortgage set up in such a way that one person can handle it. I don't have any kids, or we don't have any kids, and my wife was still working. So, which meant like there were a couple of safety nets, and that allowed me to do that jump. And so the other tip basically, is as well that you involve your family in that decision, obviously, because you might not um, just live on your own. Obviously, you have to the backup from your partner, etc., etc. And then, obviously, if your partner is a good one, then probably he will back you up in a way. But you have to find some sort of a compromise in terms of looking at reality of paying bills as well.
No, I think it's great that you pointed it out, because I do get a lot of like young mentees, young people asking me, how can I get into entrepreneurship? And they have not even completed their studies yet. So like you said, they're glamorizing entrepreneurship. And I think Gen Z, not so much anymore, but definitely the young millennials, let's say 6 years ago, constantly coming up to me and telling me, I've just graduated. How can I set up my own business? And I'm like, I've actually had 14 years of work experience in different types of functions where I can gain experience, I can gain skills and know-how, and that actually helps me to set up my own business, right? I don't think I could have done that right after I graduated from university. And like you said, it's still where we have to pay our bills, right? We're not trust fund babies, unfortunately. And we do have partners who we need to involve in terms of decision making. So I think it's really important to, yes, be clear about your own purpose, but then also understand who is in your environment, who you need support from. And at that time, actually, quite coincidentally, my husband moved back to corporate. So he was always in some sort of startup scene, entrepreneurial space. And then when I decided to move out from corporate, he actually moved into corporate. So that was a really nice safety net, as you said. And similar to you, I also got a really nice severance package, which helped me to not be too nervous about things, right? So of course, I gave myself like half a year, but it was, and I luckily didn't need that half a year to get my first job, or first project, but it gave you a little bit more confidence, a little bit more, that safety net to actually go ahead with that.
Yes. You just said it all. We said it all. I think entrepreneurship is often underestimated, or let's say, moving into the world of startups, obviously, and the discussion with startups and corporates, etc. That's exactly what we're doing now. So we're actually focusing a lot around startups in NovAzure and innovation carriers, as I always call them. And having actually done a startup, obviously on my own or with my co-founder and senior partners, etc. So it is one of the toughest thing to do, seriously. And there's so many things that can basically go wrong. I mean, how many times have we seen basically a lot of learnings or a lot of similar mistakes basically being made by startups as well, and underestimating the complexity in terms of actually launching something proper. So is probably one out of the many reasons that may actually lead eventually to a failure of a startup as well.
Right. Well, I always enjoy talking to you, Chris. So you have been navigating multiple cultural identities to now embracing the challenges of being a misfit in both your personal and professional spaces. So Chris has shown us how leaning into our differences can be also a superpower, and his journey from growing up between German, Brazilian, and Chinese influences to leading transformative sustainability initiatives reminds us that belonging isn't about fitting into one mold, but about carving out spaces where we can thrive. We explored how his experiences in the corporate world and also now in the startup ecosystem shaped his resilience, his leadership, and ability to bridge vastly different worlds. Whether it's helping startups and corporates collaborate or challenging traditional systems to accelerate the net zero transition, Chris proves that being a misfit often means being a trailblazer. So if you resonated with this conversation, don't forget to subscribe, share, and let us know your thoughts. And as always, stay curious, stay bold, and embrace the misfit in you. Until the next time, bye for now.
Thank you.